Thank you all for joining us. This is a session on NSF's updated priorities, as well as outreach and education opportunities with Explora. I am Hannah Yohalem. I'm the Assistant Director of Strategy and Programming in the Faculty Research Development Office, and we are organizing this session today with Advance at UNM. I think many of you in the room have worked with us before, but just as a reminder, FRDO is here to help with all things research, from facilitating team building to finding funding, from workshops to grant submissions. We did want to let you know that we will actually be recording this. So Sandy, if you want to go ahead and start recording. I'll come back to this, but we won't record during the Q&A. So you can ask questions without being worried about that. We are going to try, I'm going to give a presentation and then we'll have Q&A about the presentation and then we'll hear from Explora. So we ask that you save questions for the Q&A portion of the event. Or if you're afraid that you're going to forget them, you can put them in the chat, but I'm not going to pause and answer them as we go. This is also scheduled for just an hour until 1:30, but I will stay on. Other folks from FRDO and Advance and the Office of the Vice President for Research will also stay on. We will not be keeping the chat, but do remember that things can be screenshotted. So I wanted to give a little bit of framing about what this presentation isn't about. We will not be talking about UNM grant terminations. We will not be answering questions related to active awards. This is really focused on NSF, not federal funding writ large. And we're not talking specifically about UNM priorities or actions. Dr. Om Perumal, the Associate Vice President for Research, who is on the Research Rapid Response Team and is in the Office of the Vice President for Research, is here. So potentially some questions, he could answer some questions later, but again, there also is other spaces where those types of questions can be addressed. And some of you may have seen in the news this morning that sounds like NSF awards are potentially on hold again. Again, we're not going to be talking about that. The Research Rapid Response Team needs time to assess the impact of those new developments and will be sending a message out to campus when they have something to say about it and are ready to talk about it. So what we are talking about today is NSF's updated priorities. So there's a link to this. We will share the slides with anyone who's in attendance today, but it's just on the NSF website. And I did, again, want to sort of preface this with these are NSF's priorities. This is an explanation of how to best interpret their priorities. It does not reflect FRDO's, UNM's, or my priorities around research. And I'm going to be focusing particularly on the research development and proposal development piece, which again is FRDO's purview. So in this document, they start with sort of an overview of NSF's core mission, and there is no explicit change to that core mission. So the overall purview of the NSF is still to promote progress in science, advance the national health and prosperity and welfare, and secure the national defense. They also are continuing to use the 2 statutory review criteria of intellectual merit and broader impacts that they have used for many years. Which particular topics within science and engineering that they are interested in is, of course, changing. This happens anytime there is a change in administration to some extent. For example, there's often a greater focus on climate change research under Democratic presidents. Obviously, this administration's rejection of previous administration's priorities is extreme, and they are reducing NSF's overall budget. So it is not yet clear exactly what types of programs will continue to be funded in the future as the new federal budget is approved. We will obviously communicate about that. NSF, I think, will communicate about that. So what solicitations will be available, we'll have to wait and see. But so the two review criteria in a little more detail. Intellectual merit measures the potential for the proposed project to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different fields. And the other is broader impacts, the potential for the proposed project to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. So today we will be focusing mostly on broader impacts. So what I just mentioned in terms of the focus of the science more generally is really sort of more the intellectual merit purview. We're not talking about that today. Their NSF's change in priorities really addresses broader impacts as well as research specifically on broadening participation. So changes in broadening participation is one possible broader impact and area of study that NSF funding used to focus on. Previously, the aim was to specifically broaden participation in STEM among groups historically underrepresented in STEM fields. The NSF is no longer thinking about rectifying systemic or historical inequities in terms of broadening participation. They are reviewing programs based solely on equal participation now in terms of recruitment, goals, and access. So the way they're talking about that is that any broadening participation activities must aim to create opportunities for all Americans everywhere. These activities cannot directly or indirectly seem to exclude individuals or groups. Specifically, research projects with more narrow impact limited to subgroups of people based on protected class or characteristics no longer do not effectuate NSF priorities. And I will talk about what is a protected class or characteristic in a minute. Again, they reiterate that their core goal is creating opportunities for all Americans. And then finally, they do say that basic or use-inspired research that is focused on protective characteristics is still allowed when it is intrinsic to the research question and aligned with agency priorities. And I'll come back to that later in the presentation. So what does a protected class or characteristic mean? The NSF says that they are basing this on are those characteristics contained in relevant laws, such as but not limited to the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So I have the Civil Rights Act language up here. And so the part highlighted on the left, this is the introductory paragraph to the Act. And so one of the purposes of the Act is to prevent discrimination in federally assisted programs. So that is why it applies to grant funding from the NSF. The Equal Protection Clause is a little more complicated. So these groupings, these classes or characteristics are race and or color, religion, sex, national origin, and disability status is not covered by Title VII. It's covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, but NSF definitely considers it disability status a protected class. These characteristics or classes are also open to legal interpretation. There have been lots of lawsuits about what each of these mean. So I would recommend sort of applying the broadest lens you can. Sex, for example, has been taken to include things like pregnancy and has in the past included gender identity and sexual orientation. We'll have to see what happens with that. So the broader impact goals have been were defined in a law that was passed by Congress in 2010 called the America Competes Reauthorization Act. There are 7 of them. We will come back to 1 through 6 later. So it's supposed to be less legible. We're gonna, again, focus on number 7, expanding participation of women and individuals from underrepresented groups in STEM first. So the new guidance, the new priorities document has FAQs in it. So I'm gonna go through the ones that are most relevant to goal number 7, the broadening participation goal. So first, the number 4 asks, can I still propose broadening participation activities, e.g. outreach, in fulfillment of the broader impacts criterion? So they say, yes, all outreach, recruitment, or participatory activities in NSF projects are open and available to all Americans. So yes, as long as anything you plan is open to anyone. Investigators may also expand participation in STEM based on non-protected characteristics, including but not limited to institutional type, geography, socioeconomic status, and career stage. However, engagement activities aimed at these characteristics cannot indirectly preference or exclude individuals or groups based on protected characteristics. So, what does this mean in practice? This means that you can do recruitment based on geography, for example. So if you are doing a project that is local and you want to broaden participation with outreach to people just in Albuquerque or Gallup or anywhere else specific, that's still fine. So you don't have to have your participant pool be the whole nation just because they use the language all Americans. However, if they think you are using a specific place as a stand-in for one of the protected categories or characteristics, then that is a problem. So I'm going to give a very extreme example, but so let's say you have a recruitment map for a broadening participation activity that is county by county, and you sort of gerrymander it to only select recruitment participants from specific counties with a particularly high percentage of, say, like Jewish residents. That would be a problem because you're using geography, like county or zip code, as a stand-in to actually recruit a protected class of people. This does not mean that you need equal numbers of participants based on each of the protected characteristics within any given program. So in New Mexico and at UNM, programs will most likely have a disproportionately high level of Hispanic or Latinx participation compared to a similar public institution in another part of the country. So that is fine as a de facto reality of the population that our university serves, but that can't be the goal of the program. In general, whatever the activity, you do not want to frame it around any of the protected characteristics, even if you then open up the project to any participant. If you still say like the goal of this is to increase participation of women in STEM, for example, that's a no-go, even if men or other genders could participate. So next question, will NSF consider proposals directed to a legally mandated NSF program or funding opportunity? So the context for this is that there are some programs that were created by specific laws. And so they're not just programs that the NSF has oversight over, Congress also has oversight over them. I believe that the funding for HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, is one of those examples, and I think includes, which again explicitly aims to expand participation in STEM by underrepresented students who are underrepresented in STEM at the moment, are those programs. So they are not able to close those programs. So the research and broader impacts activities proposed in response to these programs should align with the relevant statutory language and aim to generate knowledge broadly impactful to Americans from all backgrounds and regions in the country. So they're saying you can apply based on what the solicitation asks for. The knowledge should be more broadly applicable. But then they say projects submitted to legally mandated broadening participation programs must not directly or indirectly preference or exclude any Americans on the basis of protected characteristics. Projects that have limited impact or rely on DEI frameworks or advocacy do not effectuate NSF priorities. So they're saying you can still apply to these programs, but whatever you are suggesting, you are proposing to do in response to these programs still can't focus on any particular protected group of people, protected characteristic or class. So they still have to be open and foster broadened participation more broadly. Question 8. There are still gaps in the achievements of certain groups of people. Can we still research those? So the answer here is pretty much a reiteration of the last one. So they say projects that aim to create more opportunities for more people in every region of the country to participate in science and technology remain an important part of NSF's mission. So they are in favor of broadening participation in general, getting more people involved in STEM in general. They will continue to operate legally mandated programs that aim to expand participation in STEM for individuals of protected characteristics. So again, they're not able, that's them saying they can't cancel some of these programs. But so long as the projects submitted to these programs do not preference or limit participation based on these protected characteristics. So even if you're applying to a program that is focused, that still exists, and is focused on broadening participation for Latinx or Hispanic students, you can't narrow your activities to only Latinx or Hispanic students. So number 9, can I research individuals or groups based on protected characteristics in other areas of science and engineering? So this is coming back to the last paragraph of sort of their overarching description of their new priorities. The answer to this is yes. Researchers may recruit or study individuals based on protected characteristics when doing so is 1, intrinsic to the research question, 2, not focused on broadening participation in STEM on the basis of protected characteristics, and 3, aim to fill an important gap in science and education and engineering knowledge. So their example is research on technology to assist individuals with disabilities may be supported even when the research subject recruitment is limited to those with disabilities. So number 2, if your research question is a research question about discrimination in STEM education, so even though that then fits into number 1, number 2 means that that is not allowed. But if it is not about STEM education and broadening participation, but is sort of a more basic science question, then limiting your recruitment is allowed. And finally, is there a list of words I should be avoiding? So the official answer from the NSF is there's not a list of words. Investigators should focus on intellectual merit and broader impacts. I think, as many of us have heard, there was a list that was used, especially early on. It is Appendix B in a Senate committee report from October, when the administration was looking at already awarded projects and trying to find projects to terminate and to cut that don't meet these priorities. Hopefully, moving forward, as new proposals will be reviewed, they will be reviewed by a committee of your peers and by program staff in alignment with these new priorities. So it will be humans and hopefully not AI keyword searches. So hopefully there will be more conceptual, holistic review. That said, I would recommend not framing any part of your proposal in terms related to protected characteristics or diversity, equity, inclusion, or other descriptors that acknowledge historical or systemic exclusions or discrimination, even if your programming is open to everyone. If you then say, but part of the goal is broadening participation for a particular group, that's a no-go, or addressing historic or systemic issues, that's a no-go. So, examples. Here are a couple that have been terminated and a couple that are allowed under the new guidance. So Bright Girls Online STEM Practices, Building Relevance and Identity to Transform Experiences was a project focused on getting more women of color involved in STEM. And so again, specific focus on women and women of color in particular, that is not allowed. Similarly, molecular modeling experiences for underrepresented students. Again, underrepresented students is sort of calling out a protected characteristic. These other two, the developing and evaluating assessments of problem solving in computer adaptive testing environments, looks at using testing environments to improve math outcomes for students in 6th through 8th grade. So again, there is a narrowing. They are talking about 6th through 8th grade students, and they are talking specifically about math students, but neither of those are protected characteristics, and they do not make any, this team doesn't make any further distinction among the math students. So they're just trying to improve math outcomes for all 6th through 8th grade students. And similarly, REU site, Designing Sedimentation and Tectonics Research and Experience for Student Success, aims to bring community college students into geosciences through a cohort-based program. So again, community college students is a narrower group of students, but there is no distinction based on race, religion, gender, disability status within that group of students. So good news is that broadening participation is only one small piece of the broader impacts puzzle. So there is a lot of really important and good work that can be done that doesn't fall under this category. So the other 6 that are listed are increasing the economic competitiveness of the United States, advancing of the health and welfare of the American public, supporting the national defense of the United States, enhancing partnerships between academia and industry in the United States, developing an American STEM workforce that is globally competitive through improved pre-K through grade 12 STEM education and teacher development, and improved undergraduate STEM education and instruction, and improving public science literacy and engagement with science and technology in the United States. I did just want to flag, in case any of you are careful readers of the PAPPG, which is NSF's guidance document, that you might be more familiar with the NSF Broader Impacts Guiding Principles, which is a 10-point list and is what they've been using for the last few years at least. It is based on the original 7 broader impact goals that were outlined in the law that set them up. A few of them expand on them. Again, like one of them added disability status to the list of groups that expanding participation should include. From now on, I would refer to the original 7 from the original law rather than those in the PAPPG. So I think in general, things that are legally mandated are going to be more stable than internal NSF policies, which are subject to change. So some key takeaways. There are so many broader impacts you can pursue with NSF funding. And what has changed is big. We don't want to make light of that. This is a major shift in priorities. Again, positives and negatives, you still can work on broadening participation in STEM education by creating programs that are open to everyone or focusing on non-protected characteristics. And again, I'll talk through some examples on the next slide. And we are here to support you and your important work. FRDO is happy to help you brainstorm ways to reframe the work you're doing, to pivot your funded research to focus on an adjacent part of your field that is more likely to be funded. We can also help you think about cobbling together different sources of funding for different pieces of your work. So maybe NSF is funding your sort of central scientific work, but you have a outreach or STEM education goal that can't be met by NSF. Maybe you try and get funding from somewhere else just for that piece. And also we want to acknowledge that if your work explicitly addresses or studies the impacts of racial or gender disparities in engineering, for example, as one option, we can help you look for non-federal sources of funding. We want to acknowledge that not all work can be pivoted or reframed, or ought to always be pivoted or reframed. So as you're just thinking about ways in which you could potentially reframe some of the, especially again, broadening participation work you're trying to do, I wanted to return to the non-protected characteristics as a useful way to think about that. So the NSF includes these examples of institutional type, geography, socioeconomic status, and career stage. So institutional type could be community colleges, it could be underperforming public elementary schools. Geography can be just like nearby UNM, or you could say you're focusing on rural populations. So thinking creatively about that. Some examples, additional examples I thought of, which again, you would have to be careful that they're not interpreted as stand-ins for a protected characteristic. Could be first-generation college students as a focus, high school quality or access, veteran or military connected status, foster care or homelessness history, incarceration or justice system involvement, or like adult or non-traditional student status. So thinking creatively about who you're trying to reach. And again, just wanted to emphasize how to reach us, that we are here to help as best we can with all of these changes. You can email us at frdo@unm.edu. We also have a support request form on the FRDO website. And if you have questions that are more applicable to your specific status of your awards, or if you have a grant termination, there is a form for the research rapid response team where you can either share information that you've learned or reach out with a question. And I did also want to advertise that we, FRDO, are running a grant revision for Outstanding Wins to Level Up program this fall called GROW. Applications are due May 22nd through InfoReady, and we will be doing a Zoom Q&A on May 15th if you are interested. This is open to anyone who has submitted a grant and either had it rejected now or previously, so it doesn't have to be just in relation to changes in federal priorities, or someone who has had a grant terminated. So we're going to talk about how to revise and resubmit or find a new opportunity for your work. If you're not sure if you qualify, I either encourage you to just go ahead and apply. The application is pretty short and straightforward, or email us at FRDO and we can answer questions.